Chapter 8. My Broken Heart. Why? Why was my life doomed? Why was everything beautiful so ephemeral? Was I cursed? I lost my mother as a child, father at a crucial juncture in my life, and now her, the one person who meant the world to me. It was a week before Christmas. The gardens of Vernon Hall were buried under sheets of snow, and the once beautiful secret garden vibrating with color under the glorious sun was nothing more than a barren expanse shrouded in snow. The hail pelted against the windows of Vernon Hall. At times the wild wind sounded like the distant howling of wolves. The waves were tempestuous, and all boats were evacuated in fear of extreme weather conditions. Death had struck Vernon Hall, this house that was now mine, now that Amelia had so tragically left this world. I slept beside her each night in her final days, and upon waking one morning, I found her motionless, her face as pale as death and her eyes partially open as though in a trance. I jolted her several times as I feared the worst, but she didn't move. Hugo was sent to fetch the doctor, but upon examining her, he melancholically shook his head. "She's gone now. I am terribly sorry for your loss. You do realize, as you were very close to her, there is a high probability you may have contracted the disease from her. You do understand that, don't you?" I gravely nodded. "I don't care, doctor. I don't care what happens to me. I have lost a part of me today." The doctor patted my arm. "You'd better make the funeral arrangements as soon as you can." Funeral? Funeral? That word pierced my ears. Amelia dead and buried? How could that be? How could I allow it? How could I let her go? I was so used to the woman. She was part of me. How could I let my poor, beautiful Amelia rot in a lonely grave? I was all she had. She was all I had. No, no, I could not think of burying her. The servants mourned her death. The parlor maids cried. The chef stood in silence and wiped his tears. And the gardener sat in sorrow in the Italian garden in the bitter cold, reminiscing of his mistress. Hugo, however, that scoundrel of a man, observed each person carefully and emotionlessly, with his usual suspicious glances. I sat by Amelia's bedside and watched her lifeless body. In truth, I too felt lifeless. My neck was stiff, my throat hurt, my hands and feet were numb, my headache worsened, and I felt I would collapse with fever and pain. By now, all the servants had gone downstairs and commenced with the funeral arrangements, hanging black draperies on the windows as a sign of mourning. I touched Amelia's lifeless hand and kissed it, hoping her fragile hand would caress my cheek as she often did, hoping she would wake and embrace me, longing for all this to be a dreadful nightmare from which I would awaken to walk once again in the secret garden with her and bask in the summer sun. But alas, her loving hand fell to the bed, and she lay there motionless. It was a sight for angels to weep over. The poetry she often recited, the haunting music she played on the piano, her laughter, everything about her flashed through my mind in a montage. I suddenly then saw something silver glisten, partially visible beneath her pillow. Upon retrieving it, I discovered it was a key. But it was no ordinary key. No, no, it was a key carved in the figure of a dragon. Where had I seen this symbol before? I thought hard and then remembered. I kissed Amelia's forehead gently and caressed her hair, then darted to the main hall. 2 parlour maids were cleaning, and I ordered them to leave the room. Seeing how impatient and irritable I was, they immediately took their leave. I then opened that dreadful trapdoor and descended to hell. It was a perfect fit. The dragon key unfastened the dragon lock, and lo and behold, that ominous treasure chest opened. It contained only a few books, shrouded in webs and dust. I rubbed off the dust and impatiently flipped the pages of the manuscripts, but they were all in Latin. They had strange images drawn on their pages, images of stars, poisons, devils, skulls, and all sorts of horrid things. I banged them all one by one against the floor. Poppycock, all of this, I muttered angrily to myself. There was, however, one final manuscript in the chest. This one had a leather cover and the initials EML carved in it. I was so distraught that I didn't contemplate the significance of the initials. I once again flipped impatiently through the pages and discovered it was a manual of some sort, in English. It provided a step-by-step guide to the procedure of embalmment. Ways of not parting with a loved one page read, exemplified by an image of a corpse lying in an open casket. But the body didn't look like a corpse, it looked as if it was sleeping. It then dawned on me. The contents of the chest, the black magic that had been practiced by the monks, finding the key under Amelia's pillow. I was being guided in a certain direction. At this point, given how numb my feelings and emotions were, it didn't matter whether I was being guided by dark forces or by God. I had to obey my instincts. It was all happening for a reason. This is what my subconscious mind desired too. I returned the manuscripts to the chest, including the embalmment one. I crept out of the dungeon, hoping none of the servants would see me. Luckily, they hadn't yet re-entered the main hall, awaiting my instructions. I returned to Amelia's bedchamber. A little while later, Pastor Franklin arrived with his son. "I am so terribly sorry, dear Eleanor. She was such a wonderful woman. I knew her all my life. I cannot even imagine what you must be going through." Pastor Franklin hid his face in his hands and wept. Gareth comforted his father, but had tearful eyes as well, and gulped constantly, trying his best to contain his tears. I sat calmly by Amelia's side. Once Pastor Franklin had recovered from his melancholic episode, he wiped his tears with a handkerchief given to him by Gareth and resumed speaking in a serious manner. "Don't you worry about a thing, Eleanor. I shall make all the funeral arrangements. She will be buried close to her parents in the cemetery just down the road. Everything will be taken care of," he reassured me. I answered numbly, "Everything has already been taken care of, Pastor Franklin." I looked at him with blank eyes. Pastor Franklin and Gareth both exchanged glances, then looked at me baffled. "What has been taken care of, my dear?" he inquired. "Pastor Franklin, I don't know if you are aware of this or not, but a few weeks before Amelia's death, she requested Mr. Bartholomew to draw up a new will. Under that will, Vernon Hall, the house, the gardens, the servants, the possessions all belong to me upon her death, and in her own words, I may choose to manage it the way I deem fit." As I finished, Pastor Franklin stared at me in shock. Eleanor, I was not aware of any such will. May I? And before he could complete his sentence, Mr. Bartholomew entered Amelia's bedchamber and spoke confidently. I'm afraid she is correct, Pastor Franklin. Miss Vernon did ask me to draw up such a will. And here it is. You do know that she had no next of kin after Christopher's death. Her brother's drowning. She therefore selected her ward as her successor to the title of Vernon Hall. She also specified a monthly allowance of £10 for Eleanor, and a principal sum of £500 to be gifted to her upon her 20th birthday. She loved Eleanor as if she were her own daughter. Mr. Bartholomew's last words destroyed my calmness, and I once again succumbed to my tears. My sobbing grew intense. Pastor Franklin held me. It's God's will, my child. I know I said the same to you when your dear father died, and I feel so terrible for saying it to you again. But we are so helpless. Oh, please calm yourself, my dear. For Amelia's sake, calm yourself. He gently patted my back. Gareth poured a glass of water for me from the jar on Amelia's bedside and handed it to me. Please drink some water, Eleanor. We're all with you. Don't worry about anything. Gareth's words comforted me, albeit momentarily. Though I had treated him callously, he still showed kindness to me. After taking a sip of water, I spoke again, snivelling. Pastor Franklin, Amelia will be buried in Vernon Hall. Inside the house, I mean. For a moment, Pastor Franklin, Gareth, and Mr. Bartholomew froze. They probably thought me insane. Mr. Bartholomew then frowned. What do you mean, inside the house? He asked. I replied sternly this time. I mean exactly what I said. Amelia is to be embalmed. Her casket shall remain inside Vernon Hall where it belongs. You are a man of the law, Mr. Bartholomew. You know you cannot exert any undue pressure on me. Amelia is mine. She is part of Vernon Hall, and she will stay here. You all have been so kind to offer me such comforting words, but you may all leave now. They stared in disbelief, and all began shouting at once. Outrageous! Unbelievable! Good God! Pastor Franklin was hysterical, beads of perspiration glistening on his forehead. My child, this is against the laws of God. You are a Christian, as was Amelia. You know what the procedure is. A proper burial is essential, otherwise the soul can never find peace. I know you are distraught, but try to think clearly. I am thinking clearly, Pastor Franklin, and I'm afraid you've outstayed your visit. All of you, in fact. I wish for all of you to leave now. Leave before I command my servants to fetch the local constable. This is my house, and you are all trespassing now that I have revoked your invitations. I admit I was brutal. All three men exchanged the most painful of glances. Mr. Bartholomew tried to speak again, but Pastor Franklin waved his hand to stop him. He grew silent. They all did. Pastor Franklin shook his head then and said quietly, Gareth, Mr. Bartholomew, she's right. This house belongs to her now, and as Amelia herself appointed Eleanor to be her next of kin, it is up to her to decide what happens to the body. We should leave, gentlemen. Thus Pastor Franklin marched out of the bedchamber, followed by Mr. Bartholomew, who was muttering something under his breath. Gareth too turned to leave, but before he did, he glanced at me. His soft green eyes glowed with tears. I felt the same way when my mother died, Eleanor. I can understand your pain. Take your time to cope with your grief. And Gareth stepped out of the room, shutting the door behind me. A few moments later, I looked out of the window. I saw the three men offer their condolences to the servants and embark on the carriage. Once the carriage door was closed and Hugo whipped the horses into movement, I knew what had to be done, and I also knew who could make it happen. Hugo, that rascal. I would employ him, or rather, bribe him to find me an embalmer. I looked at Amelia's body once more and said softly, I will never betray you, and I will always protect you, just the way you protected me, my fairy godmother.